So my father worked for a Midwestern railroad company and he was middle management, upper management, so he got moved around a lot. And so growing up, we were packing up and moving to another town every 3 or 4 years. And as I was getting older as a child, it got harder and harder as we did that. To have to start over, find a new group of friends, it was really, really a drag. And then in the 6th grade, I don't know if we moved into the wrong neighborhood. I don't know if I just randomly connected with the wrong group of kids, but I became an easy target for this group of punks who made it their mission to come after the new kid on the block. I know exactly what it is like to be bullied. And it was a very difficult year, the 6th grade year. Ended up being so bad that my parents moved me into a parochial school in 7th grade. I was subject to virtually daily harassment. I was cursed at, randomly punched on the school bus. If they had social media back then, I'm sure it would have had digital knives slung at me. The Apostle Paul wrote in Corinthians how he was in danger on the seas and danger on land and danger in the towns and danger in the country. And like Paul, I understood what he went through because that was my existence in the 6th grade. Danger in the schoolroom, danger in the locker room, danger at the water fountains. One thing saved me though, which is what we're going to talk about this morning. And so I'll circle back to my story a little later on. What I want to talk about this morning is one of the most important questions that a person can ever ask in life. And how you answer this question that we're going to give you in a moment has a direct impact on the choices that you will make in your life. If you answer this question wrongly, then you are going to set yourself up for struggle and pain that you wouldn't face otherwise. You answer this question properly, biblically, you are going to give yourself an advantage that so many in life are missing and provide for yourself a ready defense against so many of life's temptations and pressures. You ready for the question? Here it comes. It's your first fill-in on your note sheets. 3 words. Who am I? Such a simple question. But it intersects with so many profound thoughts that are rummaging around my mind and my heart and my soul. Thoughts that trouble me, that drive me, that haunt me. Why is this question so important to answer? Well, think of all the things that this question points to. It points first of all to my identity. So many struggle with this today. It's a buzzword of our time, isn't it? Identity. What is it that defines me? My gender? I'm born male or female, or am I? Or is it true what many say that sex is only assigned to me at birth and that I get to choose what I am sexually? I'm so confused. Or maybe it's my skin color. That's the primary driver of my identity. Alongside gender, race is the hot button topic of our culture right now. Or maybe my identity is found in the size of my bank account, how much money I have. Or maybe it's found in my family name or who my father was or where I went to school. Or my digital self. So many today create an identity out of thin air and they post it for all the world to see. Look at me, like me. I see identity confusion and fragility all around today that I look. Answering the question, who am I, biblically, can maybe take away a lot of that confusion. The question, who am I, also points to my purpose. Why am I here? Why am I walking on this earth? What am I supposed to do with my life? If I can find an answer to the question, who am I, maybe I'll have some clarity there. The question, who am I, also points to my value. Do I have any worth? Does it matter that I am here? Have you ever asked yourself that? What is the value of my life? Am I just 99 cents worth of chemicals, the product of random evolution, or is there something more to me? See what I mean? The question, who am I, is arguably one of the most important questions that we can ask. And this morning, we're going to attempt to find an answer to that by inserting it into the life of this man named David. You ask any Christian who the greatest heroes are in the Bible, and invariably David will be one of the top 5 people that comes to mind. And David's story and David's writing has so much to say to us about this question and others that we're going to want to ask. And so that's one of the reasons why we're going to hang out with David for a couple months before we come to Easter. Let's start, though, by sharing 4 reasons by way of introduction for why David is such a great Bible hero, why you need to know his story. First of all, David was the greatest of Israel's kings. Like George Washington was for the United States, David came early in the life of the nation, and then he cast a long and noble shadow over Israel's entire history. He was their second king, whom God specifically raised up to replace their first king, a man named Saul, who turned out to be weak, self-absorbed, and idolatrous. With the exception of a couple hiccups, one of them very severe, David's reign as king was blessed. And during his rule, Israel achieved independence from her enemies and rose to become, in his time and in the time of his son Solomon, the greatest and most powerful nation on earth for a season. Secondly, David's kingship became a prototype of the coming Messiah. Prophecies and promises were given to David by God that the descendant from his line would one day arise. And the rule of that future king would bring not only peace to Israel, but peace to the entire earth. A peace and rule that would never end. And this king, one of his names would be a son of David. Of course, we're speaking of Jesus Christ. Thirdly, David was the Shakespeare of his time. Anybody know when David lived? Can you pinpoint it roughly? BC, definitely. What century? 900 BC is the time frame we're talking about. So, just about 3,000 years ago. And during that time, David was the greatest writer, poet, and musician on earth of his generation. The Greeks were still trying to find their mojo. Socrates and all that hadn't even arisen yet. It was in Israel where a renaissance of artistic creativity was awakening through David's pen. Nearly half of the Bible's 150 Psalms are attributed to him. You know, we're tempted to think that people back that long ago, 3,000 years ago, scarcely better than cavemen. Oh, no way. Have you ever looked at the heavens at night, at the galaxies at night, and marveled at what you were seeing, felt humbled by what you were seeing? Anybody ever had that experience? Well, David did too, and he wrote about it. Next slide. He wrote in Psalm 8, "When I consider the heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him, or the son of man that you care for him?" Nobody could say it better. Have you ever done something awful and felt terrible afterwards, and you wondered how God could ever forgive you? Anybody ever been there? Raise your hand. Just me and Janice. That's it. Wow. Well, David was there, and in Psalm 51, he cried these words out to God: "Create in me a pure heart, O God. Renew a steadfast spirit within me. Do not cast me from your presence or take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation." No one could say it better. And David wrote these words. How many years ago? 3,000 years ago. There's a fourth reason David was great, and it's the reason why we're going to go on this journey with him this winter. He's the one man in all the Bible praised by God himself with these unique, astonishing words. The Bible calls David a man after God's own heart. The reference comes in 1 Samuel 13, verse 14. When Samuel says to Saul, after God has rejected him as king, "The Lord has sought out a person after his own heart." Isn't there a part of you that would love God to think that of you? To look at you and say, "My son, my daughter, you are a person after my heart." Well, that's what we're going to explore this year. It's our intent in this series for us to learn as fully as we can what that looks like. This is the key to David's greatness. Well, he wasn't born great, and he certainly wasn't recognized as great by those around him, including his own family. So let's turn 1 Samuel chapter 16. That's where we'll pick up the story today. The books of Samuel are found relatively early in the Old Testament. 1 Samuel comes right before 2 Samuel. So tell me I didn't. Don't say I didn't ever help you with anything. 1 Samuel 16 tells the story of how God introduced David to the world. Let's begin with verse 1. There's a couple little lessons that we want to pull out along the way. Verse 1 says this, "The Lord said to Samuel, 'How long will you grieve over Saul, since I have rejected him from being king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I will send you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided for myself a king among his sons.'" Now, we've already mentioned Saul. He is the current king, and the first king that Israel has ever had, and Saul has quickly run Israel into the ground. He is a man of weak faith who, over time, has become mentally unstable, irrational, impulsive, and violent. We're going to look more at his story next week because understand why David was so unique and why his heart was so different. We're going to spend a week or two to talk about Saul. Now, Samuel is Israel's spiritual leader. He is the last of Israel's judges and her greatest prophet at this time. Samuel is a man of great prayer and great integrity, and he's heartsick because he's partially responsible for unleashing Saul on the nation of Israel. But God says to him here in verse 1 in so many words, let's stop feeling bad about this. I'm working here. It's time for action. And there's a quick lesson in that I want you to jot down on your note sheet. Something we should remind ourselves periodically, that God is always working. Jesus said that. He said, "My Father is always working." And when we come to the end of our resources and our abilities, rather than collapse in on ourselves and have a big pity party, what we ought to be doing instead is turning to God. Because with God, there is always hope. Corrie ten Boom was a Holocaust survivor. And she wrote of her experience in a Nazi concentration camp in a classic book called, anybody know? The Hiding Place. You should read that book this year. And in this book, and this was a saying of Corrie ten Boom, she said, "There is no pit so deep that God is not deeper still." There is no pit so deep that God is not deeper still. We're stuck in winter right now. And it's Southern Maryland, and it's a lot better than other winters I've been in, but it's still winter. It's still cold. It's still dark. Yes? But to God, every day is a spring day. Have you ever thought of that? To God, every day is a spring day filled with promise and possibilities. We just need to learn to turn to Him in the winter of our lives when everything is dark and cold. Nobody knows it yet in the story, but even as Saul is unleashing terrible winter on Israel, God's about to turn the lights out on him. Nobody knows it. It's about to change, and God is about to bring in the dawning of a new age. Because with God, there's always hope. All the way to the time of death, if you remember the thief on the cross, there is always hope for anyone who says, I'm grabbing hold of Jesus. I know it's late in my life and I've messed it, but I'm grabbing hold of Jesus and I'm hanging on tight. For a person like that, there is hope because God is always working. God, there's that song that Rob's taught us. God is working right now. Remember that's I got to have Rob do that again when he leads worship. How does that go? Oh, never mind. God is working right now, doing something right now. Oh, Rob can do it better. That's why worship team C, when Rob is gone and Andrew is gone, you get me. I'm sorry. But lesson number 1, God is always working. Say it like that. Lesson 1, God is always working. Let's look at verses 2 to 5 for the next lesson. God tells Samuel to go to Bethlehem. Interesting, considering that David will be the prototype for the coming Messiah. He's from Bethlehem. Interesting. Get it? Verse 2, but Samuel said, talking to God, how can I go? If Saul hears it, he will kill me. In this little sentence, we gain insight into the web of fear that Saul has spread over everything. Saul, like every tyrant, is desperate to remain in power. And so, with the threat of a replacement looming, he sends out his stormtroopers to secure his power. There is a pall of dread and darkness over everything. And we see it again in verse 4. Samuel comes to Bethlehem. And look at how he's greeted in verse 4. Samuel did what the Lord commanded and came to Bethlehem. The elders of the city came to meet him. How did they meet him? Trembling. And they said, "Do you come peaceably?" Samuel replied, "Yes, in peace." And truly he has come in peace, but not the way they think. There's a lesson here about what it means to bring peace to a difficult situation. Coming in peace, here's the lesson. Coming in peace does not mean you're not going to make waves. It doesn't mean you're not going to ruffle feathers. Sometimes to come peaceably, to bring peace, you have to shake things up. You have to push back against what's wrong. It's like the family that finally decides to deal directly with the alcoholic in its midst, or the addict or the narcissist. Because until you fix what is wrong, there won't be any peace, no matter how calm things appear. Sometimes to heal, you first have to wound. The first part of surgery is the cutting. The first part of learning is the correction, and it hurts, but peace won't come any other way. And then Samuel says, I've come to sacrifice to the Lord. To bring peace requires sacrifice. It requires real effort, rolling up your sleeves, doing hard work. Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers. Notice what he did not say. He did not say, blessed are the peacekeepers. There's a difference. Peacekeepers do the easy thing. Peacekeepers come along and they sweep everything under the rug. There's nothing to see here, folks. Pay no attention to the person behind the curtain. Everything's all right. Just keep moving. Keeping peace at all costs. Demanding a ceasefire now. Peacemaking, though, is challenging, uncomfortable work. There's nothing more uncomfortable than an intervention where something that is unhealthy, that is evil even, is exposed and unmasked. That requires sacrifice and consecration to undo it. Samuel says next, consecrate yourselves, come to me to the sacrifice. And then he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. So, important lesson. Bringing peace does not necessarily mean you aren't going to ruffle feathers. Let's move on to verses 6 to 13, which gets to the heart of the story. Verse 6, when they came, Samuel looked at Eliab, and he thought, surely the Lord's anointed is before him. Now Jesse had how many sons? 7 sons. His poor mom. His poor wife. And all of them were brought out, apparently in birth order. It's like The Voice or The Masked Singer or American Idol. They're just kind of lined out from the oldest to the youngest. Samuel sees the oldest, Eliab, and he says, surely this is king material if I've ever seen it. Question, what do you think Samuel's basing his assessment on? His looks, his appearance. Eliab's the firstborn. No doubt he's the biggest, he's the strongest, the most mature looking of the lot at this moment in time. Samuel should have known better at this point. This is craziness for Samuel to think this way. This is the sort of thinking that got Israel in trouble with Saul. When Saul was first chosen, 1 Samuel 9 verse 2, maybe jot that in the margin and look at it, says that Saul was, quote, a handsome young man. There was not a man among the people of Israel more handsome than he. From his shoulders upward, he was taller than any of the people. Boy, talk about things not changing. Do we not do this still today? Talk about deciding a person's identity or purpose or value. We do it by what we see on the outside of things. But thankfully, this time around, Samuel is prayed up. And so he's close to God, and God distinctly speaks to him at this point. And God says to him in verse 7, and this may be one of the most important verses in the Bible. If you were to make a list of the 10 most important verses of the Bible, verse 7 of 1 Samuel 16 might be among them. The Lord said to Samuel, don't consider his appearance or the height of his stature, because I've rejected him. For the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on what? Outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. Say these words after me. The Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on outward appearance. The Lord looks on the heart. If you have a Bible, you should underline it verse. And it's okay to mark up your Bible. It won't send you to hell or anything. It's a verse worth memorizing as well. If you want to have a good life, a blessed life, a happy life, a successful life, you better drink deeply from that verse that we just read. A person's true identity and true purpose and true value is found here in these words. Samuel doesn't need to be told twice, so he calls the next son in line. Abinadab looks him over. Nope. Then Shammah. Sorry, thanks for playing. In all, 7 sons pass by, and no lights go off in Samuel's spirit. He's confused. God's told him one of the sons of Jesse is the one he's selected. He looks at Jesse perplexed. Verse 11, are all your sons here? Again, the Lord helped Jesse's wife, but no, there's an 8th boy. There's the youngest, Jesse answers, but he's keeping the sheep. Oh, that's a loaded sentence right there. Watching the sheep is the job you give to the runt of the family, to the littlest guy. It's a menial job that nobody wants. It's like cleaning the cat litter. That's what David is doing right now. And it never even occurs to Jesse that this son would be the one under consideration. But Samuel says, send for him. We'll wait. And David is brought in from the fields. Verse 12. And he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy, had beautiful eyes, and was handsome, which is not entirely a compliment here. Whereas Saul was a head taller than everybody, muscular, chiseled, he looked the part. This sentence is the author's way of saying that David has scarcely started shaving yet. It's not that David wasn't resourceful, strong, valiant, intelligent. We'll learn in the story of David and Goliath that this young lad David single-handedly has faced down lions and bears in his shepherding duties. But no doubt at the dinner table, whenever David has tried to tell that story, hey, in his voice that probably hasn't changed yet, hey guys, guess what I did today? No doubt all of his brothers tousled his hair. Picture Liam Hemsworth as like Thor, going, oh, what did you do, little brother? Chase away a pack of marauding chipmunks today? How many of you, I'm curious, were the youngest in your family? Quite a few of you. Perhaps you have your own memories of being overlooked? Maybe? Perhaps if that's you, what happens next in the story should thrill you. And the Lord said, arise and anoint him. Verse 13, then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. And the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon David from that day forward. Wow. Why did God choose David? Don't miss it. It's the heart of the story. And it's the heart of where you'll find your true identity and purpose and value. We might think that God chose David because he was little or young or weak. We know that God likes to do that in the Bible, yes? He likes to do things that show that he's the powerful one. He likes to pick foolish things to shame the wise. He likes to pick weak things to shame the strong. Jesus didn't choose the 12 from the elite institutions of Israel, from the best and brightest. Who did Jesus choose? Choose tax collectors and fishermen, uneducated working class men to build his kingdom with. And that may have been a factor here. I'm not saying it's not. Follows the principle. But that David is the youngest in weakness is really only incidental to why he was chosen. The Lord's already given us the criteria that he was looking for. When Samuel told Saul, God has picked somebody after his own heart. God telling to Samuel, don't look on the appearance because I look at the heart. Why did God choose David? Because of his heart. So what can we learn about David's heart this early in the story? We've hardly met him. Well, there's things here. Let's draw it out real quick as we come down the home stretch. Unbeknownst to his father Jesse or to his brothers, something else was going on in those fields as David was tending the sheep. David was seeking God. Most young men left alone will seek empty things or worse. God help the teen or child left alone with a computer or cell phone today. David didn't have those things. You know what he did have? He had something very interesting in his possession that he had with him in the fields because he was practicing with it. Well, slingshot, yes. I'm actually thinking of the lyre, which he must have played. The lyre, which was the guitar of his time. He was practicing lying. Yeah. We think that it's David's sling. We think that it's David's sling that brings him into Saul's court and attention when he slays Goliath. But you read the second half of chapter 16. We don't get to it today. We'll start with it tomorrow. You read the second half. It's David's lyre, his musical ability that brings him into the presence of Saul. So what was David doing with the lyre in those fields? Did he have a garage band? No, but he was writing songs. How do we know that? Because some of those early songs found their way into the Bible. He wrote, again, half of the Bible's 150 psalms. So surely some of them came from this time period in David's life. In fact, I believe his magnum opus, his best psalm ever, Psalm 23, I bet it was written right after this time. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. So if these are the songs that David is writing about his love for God, what does that tell him about his heart? That he loved God with every fiber in his being, and he trusted God with all his might. This young man, ruddy of appearance, scarcely even shaving, had extraordinary, mature faith. And here's the rub. David drew his sense of identity and purpose and value from God and what God thought of him. Because David knew that he mattered to God, then what didn't matter to David? It didn't matter that he was the youngest of the family. It didn't matter that he was despised by his brothers and overlooked by his father. Because David knew he mattered to God, then it didn't matter that he didn't look fully the part. He wasn't fully developed yet. He wasn't as fine a specimen as Eliab. It didn't matter that his muscles weren't as big as Shammah's yet. Because David knew that he mattered to God, then it didn't matter that he was the lowly shepherd, that he wasn't the most popular kid. It didn't matter that he didn't have hundreds of Facebook friends. It didn't matter that when he posted one of his psalms online, nobody liked it right away. Didn't matter. What mattered to him is that the most important being in all the universe, the most powerful being in all the universe, that being looked at him, knew him, loved him. David played and sang before an audience of one, and it was from that one that David drew his sense of identity and purpose and value. And this lesson was not lost on me when I was a sixth grader, 11 years old. Not fitting in anywhere and with anyone, and even getting relentlessly bullied. Because of that constant moving, making friends and losing friends, I picked up reading. I began to read a lot during this time. It helped me to pass the time. It fired my imagination. It inspired me to start writing my own stories. In the third and fourth grade, while my classmates were plowing through the Berenstain Bear books, you know what books I was reading in third grade? I was reading the original Frankenstein. I was reading Tom Sawyer. I was reading Great Expectations. Third grade. And my favorite book of all, Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas, about Athos, Porthos, Aramis, and D'Artagnan, all for one and one for all. That's my favorite novel of all time, Three Musketeers. Third grade, fourth grade. It was, and then I started reading the Bible. alongside of that. I was given a Bible in the 3rd grade, and I began to read that as well. And I still have my 3rd grade Bible. And I spent a lot of time, guess what, with David in the Psalms, because that's where I have most of my underlinings. David was instrumental to me at this time period of my life. And real faith ignited in my heart, so much so that at the age of 11, I gave my life to Christ. I believed in Him since I was born. I was brought to church, loved Jesus, but I followed Him. I made that choice to follow Him at 11. And I'll never doubt that a young person is capable of very real, strong faith, because I was that child. And I really loved Jesus. Oh, and in 3rd grade, I also started taking guitar lessons. I picked up my lyre, and I started writing songs. And I came to learn what David learned, that God made me, that God knew me, that God loved me. And it was that rock-solid assurance that preserved me during those years. You would have looked in the lunchroom and seen me sitting off by myself, and you would have thought to yourself, that poor kid. You would have thought me shy. You would have thought me unpopular, nerdy. Nothing wrong with being nerdy, by the way, but I did like Star Trek. I guess that counts. But inside, God was making me strong and confident and secure. You would have never known that that kid sitting off by himself was good at words. First time I gave a speech in freshman speech class. How many of you in high school have to do speech class? Henry, you have speech class? Yeah. In freshman speech class. And guess what? We had moved again between 8th grade and 9th grade. They had assigned speech topics, and I had to give a speech on the dangers of television. You should have seen their mouths drop to the floor. Wait, that's the kid in the lunchroom. God was up to something. And gradually over time, things came around for me. I went on, I graduated with honors, had a few friends. I even had girlfriends in high school. Can you, Janet. Beverly Christensen, 7th grade. And when Dad moved yet again at the beginning of my senior year this time, from Chicago to Omaha, I said, nope. And I left home, moved back to Chicago in the middle of my senior year at the age of 17. I lived with a friend. I got a 20-hour-a-week job at Kmart. I paid rent at 17. I finished school there, and then after summer, moved on to college, and I had a clear sense of purpose by then. I left those bullies still clinging to their Berenstein Bear books. I met a gorgeous girl from New York named Janice, and the rest, as they say, is history. But none of that would have happened if Jesus Christ had not claimed my heart first. And my friend, whoever's listening here in this room, watching online, or seeing this months from now, you need Jesus Christ now more than ever. The world with its technology today has only made the pressures that I was dealing with, the loneliness that I was dealing with, the temptations 1,000 times worse. And how this generation needs to hear this again and again. And parents, how you need to speak this truth over your kids again and again and again, that their identity is not defined by Hollywood or Instagram or TikTok. Your identity is defined by the God who made you. God is the one who made you into a man or woman. Gender's not assigned to you by a doctor. It's assigned to you by God. And you don't get to choose it later in your life. God determines who you are, and then He gives you clear markers so that you know beyond a shadow of a doubt who you are, so that you can then grow up into a man or woman after God's own heart. But your identity is far more than just your gender or your skin color or your ethnicity. You are a unique and special creation of the living God. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. And if you learn to draw your deepest sense of identity from that one, the one who made you and loves you, then you can stand strong and confident when the winds of culture and peer pressure blow over you. And your purpose is not defined by anything in the world. Your purpose is defined by God. David wrote in Psalm 57, we're going to sing a song in a moment based on Psalm 57. David says, I cry out to God Most High, to God who fulfills His purpose for me. Your purpose is not defined by your grade point average or what college you go to, what talents you have or don't have, by whether you win or not. by your health, by your family, by whether your father loves you or not. You have a heavenly Father who loves you. That's what matters. Your heavenly Father is proud of you. That's what matters. And your value is defined by God. Your value is not defined by how you look, how developed you are, how thin you are, how pure your skin is, how big your biceps are. You are beautiful right now in God's eyes. Beautiful. Stop thinking about hurting yourself. Stop thinking about cutting yourself. Or worse, do not hurt something precious that the living God has made. Your value is not defined by your popularity or how many people like you. So stop throwing that false, phony self out there. Stop doing things you hate to be liked. Stop posing and wearing masks and acting cool to be liked. God's already checked that box. God likes you. Turn to your neighbor and say, God likes you. In fact, the most important being, God likes you. I'll be your neighbor. Everybody say, God likes you, Lindsay. It's better yet, the most important being in all the world loves you. Loves you. And He's dying for you to know Him. In fact, He died for you to know Him, and His name is Jesus Christ. And His arms are open wide to you right now. So, dear ones, here in the room, watching online, somebody stumbles across this message maybe years from now and sees this. Like David, seek God. Run into His arms. Today. This moment.